Well, I appreciate you all. My name is Logan Stanley, and I'm with Edward Jones Investments. As you probably overheard me talking to Eddie, I've spent the last 16 years in Joplin trying to, and really just working with families and working with individuals as it relates to a number of different financial matters. Specifically, what we're going to talk about today, and really what my goal is with our time spent today, is just to try to give you new ways, and maybe not different ways, but maybe reaffirm just those ways to think about your money. And what I want to do is just share some tips, share some guidelines on how you can evaluate your financial situation, how you can look at your money, and looking at, again, how do you try to make sure that those dollars are working as hard for you as possible. We're going to talk about budgets, which I know is kind of that word we cringe about, but certainly I hopefully just walk away with just some things to think about. Looking at strengthening credit, things just to consider as it relates to as you look at your credit. I overheard a couple of individuals talking about that. These are just, you just need to be aware of these things. Just need to be aware. And really by the end of this, of my time, I just want to make sure that you have the tools at your disposal to make sure that you are as prepared as possible, to try to make sure that you are controlling what you can control, to try to make sure that you're successful financially. One of the things that we will always start with is we talk about, and really what I use in my business is we use what we would call the five steps to financial success, and really those keys. Everyone has a different goal. Everyone has a different objective. That goal and that objective, your needs, so to speak, will always be the center of our conversation, or center of any conversation. And then what we do from there is we will talk about where are you today. This is very realistic. We talk about this is where we start. We've got to make sure that we are as realistic as possible. And then we talk about where are you going? Where do you want to be? Whether it be to save for a car, save for a house, save for college, save for retirement. I mean, everyone has a different financial goal, but where do you want that to be? And then what we get to do is we get to talk about how realistic that is. Because the last thing we want you to do is get discouraged. Because when you get discouraged, then that's when, unfortunately, things start to lax. And that's not what you want. You want to make sure that you're as realistic as possible, so that way we can set appropriate expectations. And then how do we do it? Now, this is a lot of times where my clients will ask me to go to work. And that's where I get to come up with strategies, come up with suggestions, recommendations. As we talk about these things, this is your money. These are just tips, these are guidelines, these are just suggestions. But it's important to make sure that you're trying to get as much information as possible so you can make the best decision possible for you. And then finally, it's important to review. As we know in life, if we had children, animals, whatever it may be, if they don't get love, they will misbehave. You must do the same for your finances. That if they don't get love, they will misbehave. And so that's a lot of times what we will tend to do, at least on a regular basis, at least once a year for investments, and then more frequently that for budget and for other savings scenarios. So let's go ahead and just kick off. We'll talk about where you are today. And when we talk about this, a lot of it's based on perception. Often our perception of how we spend money and the reality of actually what takes place are worlds apart. Meaning we know how we should spend, we know how we should save, but when we really sit down and put the pen to paper and look at banking statements and those things, sometimes there's a disconnect. And sometimes we have help with that. I have 2 daughters. I get it. Sometimes, again, you pick your battles and you try to control what you can. But what budgeting does, in a sense, it just helps you get a handle on what you spend each month, how your income needs can cover those expenses, and then really identifying how you can save any amount, no matter how big or how small, for some future purpose. Whether it be for emergency, whether it be for a future purchase, for whatever it may be. It's a matter of looking at that budget. And so what happens is we find, especially as we're talking with people as they get closer to retirement, that budget becomes really important. Because when you are no longer working and you're dependent on other sources of income, if your budget is out of line, then you're going to have serious problems. I could say the same as for right now if you're working or if you're putting together a budget, is knowing where those dollars are being spent, just more than for categorization. So in your packet, there is a budget worksheet. It's on the left side of your packet. It's very, very helpful. Again, this is just a way, it just gives you a checklist of things to think about. I'll give you a great example, and it sounds really silly, but I think it is meaningful. That when you look at your monthly budget worksheet, as I visit with a lot of folks who are getting closer to retirement, they forget about pets, they forget about haircuts, they forget about some of the stuff that we don't necessarily take for granted, but I mean, you keep doing those things. So again, it's important just to document. And again, and this isn't a gotcha. This is for you. This is for you. This is just a very, very helpful exercise. And it's important to know what's coming in and what's coming out. And I think also it allows you to prioritize. What is the important stuff, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and then what are the things you have to do, and what are the things you get to do. I mean, there's a big difference there. So we're not going to have time to complete this or anything. I want you to have it because I think it's just, there are different areas and there are different ways in order for you to, look at where those dollars are going. But I think you owe it to yourself. It is a good exercise to know where those dollars are being spent. And I wouldn't do it on Christmas. I wouldn't, if this was in December, I wouldn't say start a monthly budget now, or at least document that. I don't think that's not going to be realistic. So just look at a normal month and just say, okay, where are those dollars going? And understand that there's going to be some things that come along that are unique and they may not be long lasting. So don't make permanent decisions with temporary scenarios, so to speak. But what we want to do is we want to start thinking about, when we talk about the goals and we talk about where you're going and all those things, what you want to try to do is you want to try to keep your financial goals and give them different time frames. What we will tend to recommend is that when it comes to personal goals, you want to keep them in a 6-month time frame, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, beyond. I mean, you want to break this down. And we'll talk a little bit about how to prepare financially for that. But what you want to do is you want to make sure you're categorizing those goals where it's not reasonable for you to be able to have retirement saved right now. That is perfectly reasonable. However, in the next 6 months, what are some things that you may want to consider? What are some things that you may want to just keep in mind as you're putting together your budget and putting together your plan? So if we talk about this, kind of a more immediate goal would be that you've got enough cash to meet your needs. I think that's pretty basic. That you want to make sure that you've got the ability, the funds available to support what you have listed on your budget. Now, there can be, again, there are temporary situations that come to be, whether it be jobs and you're transitioning. So again, but on a normal month, normal circumstance, is there enough income for you to pay those expenses? If it's not, then I think you've got a couple of options. Number one is you look at your budget and you got to make some decisions. You've got to make some sacrifices. The other thing is that if your needs are available and your cash needs are meeting, your cash is meeting your needs, then that means it probably would be wise at that time to think about what amount, big or small, your choice, that you can start saving and putting away for an emergency for the time in which you may not have income to meet your needs. So what you want to do is you need to be building up for some of that unexpected, unpredictable events. That may happen. May not happen, but there's high probability sometime in your life, doesn't have to be an EF5 tornado, but it could be something significant where you may be reliant on those dollars that you save. So while you have the income today to meet those needs, it would be smart, it would be prudent to think about what amount you can start to put away for some future purpose, for what we would determine as emergencies or unpredictable or unexpected. They even can be done for other things, whether it be vacation. or you need to buy a car, or you need to save for some future purpose. So that needs to be incorporated as well. But if you have the ability for you to have your needs being met from your income, then you always need to be thinking about the future. You always need to be planning ahead. If you don't have a good emergency amount put away, then that probably is the first thing to address. After that, then that's when you can start talking about those other things. We can start questioning priorities if you don't have an emergency and you're planning a vacation. Well, I'm not going to get into that, but that is food for thought. So anyway, but if you always want, and you also want to think about 5 years from now. I have a 6-year-old and I have a 3-year-old. In 5 years, I've got to probably be thinking about braces and those kinds of expenses. It's not cheap. So am I put that money aside today? Absolutely not as a lump sum, but every month it's a part of my budget. It's not necessarily earmarked for that expense. It's earmarked for some future expense. But my time frame is a 5-year time frame. And I'd encourage you to do the same. Is you want to make sure you think about education. You think about student debt. Think about this stuff. How does that fit into the budget? If you're thinking about putting a down payment on a house or paying on your mortgage, those are the things to think about. So that 5-year window, that normally comes into mind regarding, what, again, your situation, what do you anticipate in the next five years that looking like? And then looking at 10 years, that may be completely different. That may be more about a home. That may be more about really putting away assets for retirement. And so as you think out and as you actually kind of plan that out, it allows you to take a portion, but you don't have to do it all today. You kind of, again, you break that down into 6-month, 1 year, 5-year, 10-year, if that makes some sense. But when we look at our goals, okay, sorry. But the thing is that it can get easily overwhelming if you look at all those things that you want to do and you probably know you need to do, but it's a matter of looking at the situation and realize you can't do it all. So then what it comes down to is it talks about prioritization. Make sure that you are prioritizing where those dollars are going. Now, as a financial advisor, we talk a lot about priorities.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay. Call someone up here to see. Play, press the
Question mark.
and turn off and on again. Okay, sorry guys.
We'll just go with that.
Okay, we'll go with it. Many people have tried to keep me from speaking. It's humanly impossible. I'm kidding. That's a God thing. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're looking at trying to prioritize and trying to, again, leverage those dollars as best you can. So what we're going to try to talk about today is we're going to talk about just some things to consider, just some tips to consider. You have some notes here, so you can kind of work with me. And so I'm going to try to keep up with you all. And I would move again, but we've got the camera on me. So, but if what we tend to use is we use this acronym of uses for the 4 uses of cash. Because cash has tremendous benefits, having cash available, but there are some trade-offs. Trade-offs are you're not going to earn a lot of money on your cash at the bank. So that for a long-term perspective, that may not be the best use for it. But if we look at our current spending needs, it's important that we look at that cash to be there and available for those unexpected expenses. Now, we're going to skip around a little bit as it relates to this acronym, so just kind of bear with me here. The first one that we'll talk about is the E part of that acronym. So, and that stands for everyday spending. Are you guys keeping track with me? Okay. If you're not, stop me because I'm going through my notes here. So when we start with this one, this is the first thing that needs to be addressed with your budget. Again, these are the things you must do. You don't get to do these. You must and you have to do these. So when we think about everyday needs, let's think about this. So we think about groceries, we think about utilities, we think about those things that we know we've got to do, whether it be mortgage payments, car payments. If we don't pay them, we've got some serious issues. And so that would be the first thing that we'd want to include on that budget. And we would call those as necessary. Not discretionary, but they're necessary. Now, there's going to be some things that, could you eat ramen noodles every night and save some extra cash? Yes, absolutely you could, but it's got to be sustainable. Will you do it? And if you can make some adjustments, make some trade-offs, and trade in peanut butter jelly for ramen noodles, knock yourself out. But needless to say, you can't just scrimp on that forever because you'll pay the price later. It's either with high sodium and bad health, or you'll just quit because you'll stop doing it because it's no fun. But when we talk about the cash available, a lot of times what we'll also look at is, as I mentioned, talking about those unexpected or kind of those rainy day dollars that you need to have available for emergency purposes. And I would call that a necessity as well. That is not an option. You will have, if you haven't already, there will be times in your life where you'll have unexpected expenses come up. Some you can prepare for, others you can't. If you can prepare, it's important that you try to figure out how to do that. If you can't, then you need to have a plan. You need to think it through. And we can talk about credit, how to best use credit, those kinds of things. Life does happen. I think we understand that. But on the next slide, what you're going to hear is there are people that have too much cash. And it's a good problem to have, trust me. It's a great problem to have. But there's a little bit of an oxymoron here because when we talk about cash and you have savings or you have scenarios where you've got dollars that are meeting your needs and you need dollars that maybe need to be saved for the future, if you have the ability to have that emergency kind of, and we'll talk about the amounts here in just a second, that is imperative. But anything that's probably beyond 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's better probably not to be sitting in a checking account. It's better earning interest in other safe, conservative vehicles, but it's not going to be best to keep it in your checking account. Because if anybody has a checking account, you know what the interest rate is on that checking account. It is 0. So as the cost of goods and services grow, the cost of groceries, utilities, the exception of gas prices recently, you've got to keep up with that. You've got to keep up with that. That's the inflation factor that we must keep up with. But when we talk about the budget, what we tend to do is we want to make sure, and this goes into the next kind of tip, is we want to build that reserve. As we build that reserve, the recommendation is 1 to 2 months of living expenses in cash. In cash. That's a good starting point. If anybody's attended Dave Ramsey's seminar, he talks about $1,000. I don't care what the number is. It's your number. It's your number. But you've got to have something. You've got to have something. If you don't have it, you've got to figure out how you're going to get it. And so the key to that is this is assuming that you're working. If you're working and you've got a paycheck coming in, 1 to 2 months is appropriate because your cash is getting refreshed all the time. So if those dollars, beyond the 1 to 2 months, it may be important to have those dollars in a separate account earning some interest. But I think to get started is you want to make sure that you've got at least 1 to 2 months set aside in cash. And what I mean by cash is checking, available, accessible, not cash. I don't think anybody carries cash much anymore. So between debit cards and Apple Pay and everything else. So beyond that, though, I think for planning purposes, at least I know I feel this way because I struggle with this, is that if I see extra money in a checking account or in my debit card, accessible to use my debit card, that money gets spent. So you need to force yourself to maybe set up a separate account, a savings account, that within the bank you can still get to it for emergency purposes, but that money is not commingled with your checking account. having this kind of breakdown of using checking and savings. And a lot of people, they'll have multiple savings accounts. If you ask Debbie, if there's different projects going on, you're going to have different accounts for that money because it allows you to earmark for that money. So we talk to people that have a vacation fund, they've got a car fund, they've got a pet fund, they've got you name it, they've got a fund. That may be overkill, but the thought of earmarking it, the thought of putting that money away is not a bad thought. You've got to force yourself to make sure that you're not going to be at risk of accessing that because it may defeat what you're looking for. But if there is an issue that comes up, you better be sure it's easily accessible. It's easily accessible. Does anybody have a savings account that they use regularly? Okay. I mean, it's nice to have it set up. Normally it doesn't cost anything extra to have set up. And if it does cost you extra, talk to your bank or find another bank, because there are banks that will want to do that. But it's important to look at that and then try to find, within reason, what interest rate you can earn on that. The other thing that is really helpful, as we found out, is automatic deposit. So if you think about paychecks and those kinds of things, it's really nice that, if that paycheck can come in. And I say that because we have some individuals who have had a lot of success, of taking a portion of what they're getting automatically, maybe $25 and maybe $50, and that goes into their savings account every time or every month. It's for savings. Still your money, still there. Just what you're doing is you're creating the habit and the discipline of putting that money and setting that aside all the time. And so what I encourage you to do is use the same checking account for expenses. Gas bills, electric, utility, mortgage, whatever it may be, use the same checking account. I wouldn't get, too complicated there. But when we talk about savings account, you may want to have a deliberate place for that. Whether that be for emergency purposes, some, future expense that may come, down the road. But it's nice to have those things set aside. The next tip that we're going to go through is auto-paying bills. Now, there's a little disclaimer here. So, because it can be very, very difficult as life happens if you miss a payment. And we'll talk a little bit about credit in just a second. But having those bills automatically deducted from your electric bill, payments, those kinds of things makes a tremendous amount of sense to the point where you don't have to think about it. It's automatic. Okay? However, you need to have a cushion there. Because the problem is, if for some reason, due to timing, you have something bounce back, it could be costly. So you need to have enough of a cushion on your day-to-day, month-to-month checking account where if Empire District takes out their bill payment, but it just so happens you wrote a check here and you missed it by a couple of hours, you may get dinged with overdraft charges. So please be very, very careful. The other thing, though, is it's nice because you get in the habit of not seeing that money in your account, meaning that money's gone. I mean, it's going to an important purpose, but you're not spending that money. So what we'd encourage you to do is to make sure you're setting that up for convenience purposes, but you don't get in the habit of overdraft charges. Now, the other thing is you have to be very, very careful, is make sure you know what's coming out, because a great example is from my father's checking account. My father's had an account for 30 years. Someone reprinted checks from his account. They didn't compromise a debit card. They didn't steal a credit card. They reprinted checks from his account and used them in Georgia. Okay? It is a nightmare if you have all these automatic bill payments and all of a sudden you have it compromised and then you get to go back to work and try to replace that. So the bank will honor that. They get it. That's the cost of their doing business. But needless to say, you just need to be mindful of that. Be aware. Just be aware of what's coming in and out of the account. But it's in this day and age of identity theft, it happens all the time. So, but when we're looking at, but the other aspect of this is we'd encourage you to sign up for online access. Make sure you know, and a lot of times you can do it with an app, a lot of times you can do it online, where you know what's coming in, what's coming out. And I don't think you need to be regimented where you look at it every hour. I'm just saying on a regular basis you need to be aware of what's going on. You need to be balancing your checkbook. You need to know what's coming in and what's coming out. Because what happens is if you miss it due to timing, overdraft fees, late payments can hurt you financially and also credit-wise, which does help you financially in the end. As we go to the next step, the ability to use debit and credit cards are, you've got to have a good plan as it relates to working with those. I think it takes a significant amount of discipline. Debit cards are wonderful for easy access. That way you're able to use those dollars as you always have and not have to worry about cash and everything else. The thing is, though, is that you've got to be very careful because of timing issues. So just be mindful of it. It's a great way to manage money and use them as tools, but just be mindful of that if you're spending it, you better make sure you're documenting it. You better make sure you're documenting it. So what we always encourage is have a ritual. Have a ritual. If you do it monthly, fine. If you do it weekly, great. Again, you may not need to do it every day, but just have a ritual and make sure that you're organized. That's all I can stress, is just be organized. So the other aspect, and then also I talked to your bank about overdraft protection, that they can offer it and protect you a little bit. That's going to help you a lot, because if you have to pay a fee rather than kick it back, it's going to hurt your credit if it kicks back. If you have to pay a fee, it's probably not going to hurt your credit. So just be mindful of that. Credit cards are a necessary part of life. You can't do a lot without a credit card. You can't go to a hotel normally. You can't rent a car. I mean, there's certain things that in life you're going to need a credit card. But being able to, I think, in a very organized and a very methodical and a disciplined way, I think you can use that to your advantage. Meaning that there's going to be times where events are going to happen where you're going to need a little bit of assistance to pay for things. And the credit card is very helpful with that. Where you get into trouble is when you do that with the intent of paying it off and then you don't do it. I think that, I don't think I need to talk to you about that. I think it's just common sense. If you use credit cards and you're comfortable with that and you're very disciplined with it, then there's rewards for that. Credit cards will offer that. It's not a reason to set one up, but if you're going to use it, you might as well get some benefit. These credit card companies are going to want to offer different benefits, but there's a cost to that. Cost is they'll let you use it, they'll charge you interest if it's not paid off. So just be very, very mindful of that. If you start getting in the habit and the trap of you're using one credit card to pay down another credit card, that is the red flag. Okay? If it's starting to get a little bit out of control, then you need to get back to the budget. Let's go back to the basics. Again, because what will happen is it will perpetuate itself. It's that dangerous snowball effect that can happen. But don't be afraid of credit cards. Don't be afraid of them. Figure out how it works for you. If that means that you know yourself well enough that if you have a $1,000 limit on your credit card and that's it, then you need to do that. If you know if it says $5,000 and you're going to spend $4,000 on unnecessary things, then you need to be careful, because that is going to catch up to you at some point in time. But you just want to make sure you use it as a tool. It's not a solution, it is simply a tool. So to go back to the acronym, they're going to talk about the U, which is the unexpected expenses. And in life, it is not a matter of if. It is truly a matter of when we're going to deal with the unexpected. And this is important to have that cash reserved for unexplained medical expenses or for any other home repair, whatever it may be. And it needs to be accessible. Those dollars need to be available. You don't need to be debit card available per se, but within a day or two, you need to be able to get your hands on those dollars. So a lot of times we'll talk about not necessarily the cash that you have on hand for the day-to-day, month-to-month, but for purely emergency purposes. So this is quote-unquote emergency stuff. Now, when we talk about emergencies, we can go down a road where we can start to borrow some trouble. Meaning we can start thinking of all the problems and all the issues that could come up. And most of the times when we do that, we can easily budget thousands of dollars for that, whether it be car, whether it be medical, on and on and on and on. The issue is that that's not reasonable. It's not reasonable for you necessarily to have thousands of dollars set aside, but what is reasonable is to have kind of a working number. So if you have probably 1 to 2 months just available kind of as a cushion in your checking account, the emergency would be the savings account money. That is not for vacation, that's not for whatever you've determined. This is for pure emergencies, for the unpredictability, okay? The recommendation is about 3 to 6 months. Again, you don't start at 6, you start at 3. And find that comfort level. Now, depending if that 3 months is reasonable or 6 months, that is your call. It's a peace of mind number. And I will tell you this, in life, when it comes to money, when it comes to things that are financial in nature, peace of mind is priceless. Okay? There's a lot of things that are going to keep us up at night, but if we know we've addressed this issue, you're going to be doing yourself a huge favor. And you also need to have a reasonable time frame. You cannot do it overnight. It may be from now until the end of the year, 2016, I want to build up 3 months in emergencies. And it's dedicated as emergencies. If you can get to 6 months, that would be wonderful. The math behind this, and this was done in 2013, the Department of Labor said that most people who are actively looking for employment will spend about 4 months unemployed if they're actively looking. So the reason why 3 to 6 months would be appropriate from a planning perspective is if that is your, and again, averages and statistics are what they are, meaning that that may not be your specific situation. Just looking at in general, if you have 4 months protected to prepare for that experience, then that would be really, really important for you to figure out how that comes into play. So going to one of the next letters on the acronym is going to be for S, and that's short-term savings goals. Short-term savings goals are going to be in the next 12 to 24 months. What's coming up? Is it graduation? Is it trips? Is it kids? Is it not? I mean, I'm on and on and on and on. Figure out where that fits. If it's wedding, or again, you can fill this in. But if you've got dollars that are 12 to 24 months out, it's probably going to be better for you to earn some interest on that money. Probably not necessarily in a savings account, but I know CDs are